Okay, so welcome back everyone. Now we're going to start with the actual new lesson. So in this new lesson, we'll talk about two things. Number one, percentiles. Number two, quartiles. They both represent measures of spread, and I'll write that down in here. The reason why we call them measures of spread is because they tell us how the data is spread in a data set, so how far apart they would be from each other, how far apart would be the lowest from the highest, etc., and more details as well. So there are three measures of spread. Number one is the range, which we already spoke about. And number two is the percentile that we are learning today, and then the quartile. Okay, so starting off with percentiles, we're going to say that a percentile will tell us approximately what percent of data is or are less than a particular data value. Okay, so they are a good way actually to rank data when we have a lot of data, but we want to keep them private. So we don't want to say exactly, let's say for example, what mark I earned in a certain course, but I can give you information in what percentile I was. So I would say that, say, I was in the 50th percentile. So I got the same mark as the first 50% of the students, the first half of the students. So let's write the definition. So we said that it tells us approximately what percent of the data are less than a particular or a specific data value. Okay, so let's say for example that we have in here, like I put this chart in here for us to kind of get an idea of what percentiles are. So a 65th percentile, if you see, let's say the last one in here, we're going to say that these are the data listed from lowest to highest, and 67th percentile would be above the half, right? About half of the data. So that would make up 67% of this data set here. Okay, so if there are 100 people in here, then 67th person will be in here. If there are 200 people in here, that would be the 134th person. Okay, we're going to talk about it in more details in our examples. It would be a lot more clearer and easier to understand there. Now moving on to quartiles, we're just doing the definitions to start with. Okay, so quartile is actually any set of three numbers that divide a data set into four equal parts. And I know this sounds confusing. We'll write the definition and I'll explain it into more details. So any of three numbers that divide or separate data set into four equal parts. Okay, now how does that work? Suppose that we have a data set and it's represented by this long line in here, and all the data are listed from lowest to highest. Now, we want to divide this data set into four equal parts. To divide this into four equal parts, first we'll divide it into 2 equal parts. So that's how we divide it into 2 equal parts. We find the middle number. Okay? Now we have 2 equal parts. To make 4, we'll take the first half and divide it into 2. And then the second part and divide it into 2 equal parts. So as you see in here, we have used 1, 2, 3 numbers. And these are the 3 numbers that we're talking about. So 1, 2, 3 numbers. And those 3 numbers have divided our data set into 1, 2, 3, 4 data sets, and they're equal to each other. Now, the very first number here is called the first quartile, so that's Q1. The second number is called the second quartile, Q2. The third one is called the third quartile, or Q3. So, the second quartile, as you see in here, is the median of the data set. Okay? Now, it cuts the data in half. So, it is the same as the 50th percentile. Which means that Q2 will be what separates the first 50% of data from the second 50% of data. Now, the first quartile, Q1, is also the lowest quartile and is again the median of the first half of the data set. Okay, now it separates the lowest 25% of the data set. So here is the first 25%, so first quarter, and it separates the first quarter from the second quarter, right in here. Now it is the same as the 25th percentile. Now the third is what we call the upper quartile, Q3, and it is again the median of data values greater than the second quartile. Okay, and it separates the highest 25% of the data set. So what we're going to say is the same as the 75th percentile. Okay, because when you arrive at Q3, you have arrived at 75% of the data. Okay, so hope this made sense, and we're moving on to the example where we can practice.